Hi guys, this is Nia and welcome back to another video. Today I will be painting this rattlesnake plant. It's a type of Calathea. I wasn't into plants before until I started painting them and pay more attention to leaf shapes and things like that. And I realized that tropical leaves are so interesting to look at. And when I was at church a few weeks ago, I came across these plants and I thought that it was so cool that the leaves looked like it's been painted or illustrated on. It has such a distinct pattern and I thought it was fake at the beginning. I find it so interesting and it looks kind of creepy at the same time, and I decided to try to paint it, so if you're interested, please join me. I'm going to first draw this out so you can see the details if you want to paint along. The overall leaf shape is very elongated, but the sides have slight frills and sort of like a wavy texture. This also varies from leaf to leaf. Some has more distinct frills and some are a little more subtle. Inside the large long leaf, there's another leaf pattern, and for this you can either draw from side to side or top to bottom, depending on whichever is easier for you. The pattern for this looks like a heart shape, but the opposite side is either bigger or smaller. So if you want to draw it from the top to bottom, they're sort of like an unfinished teardrop shape, and when you draw them from the top, make alternating sizes between the larger and the smaller ones, and again with the other side, but make sure the larger teardrop shape is paired with a smaller teardrop shape. And if you're drawing it from side to side, just make sure that you always have different pairs and alternate as you go down the leaf. You can either draw them as is with the front view or just the leaf facing forward, but you can just play with the tilt of the leaf, or you can also draw different folds or incorporate different sides of the leaf. So I'm just going to draw some out in case any of you are interested, but if you're intimidated by this, you can just stick with the front facing forward. That would still look really nice if you bunch them all together. To make the fold or a little bit of the side view of this leaf, you can draw like a crescent shape and then draw the frills on one of the sides of the crescent line and another one in between those lines. As you rotate this more, you will be able to see more of the back of the leaf. So for that, I'm not going to add the additional wavy line in between of the crescent lines. Instead, I'm just going to mark some lines to indicate that that is the back, and where the front of the leaf is showing, I'm just going to draw a little bit of the pattern. Here's another way you can draw a fold. This has a little bit of foreshortening happening, which can be a little bit tricky to draw out, but you can start out by drawing a curve, then find the peak at the curve and draw a line across the top, making sure that the peak of the curve is in the middle. Then connect the sides to create a triangle. Then close everything off to the bottom line, and after that I have the basic shape of this. I'm just going to curve some of the edges and also add the frills. If this is something that you're interested in, you can try to draw a few of these and alternate the initial curve to make different angles. When you're painting this out, you can either do this by painting straight or by drawing it out first. I decided to draw mine out first, but I also added some leaves freehand afterwards. Next, I'm going to go through the colors. This plant has two sides. One side has a gradation of dark green and light green with the pattern, whilst the back of this plant is sort of like a maroon or burgundy color. So for the green part of the leaf, I'm going to be using the colors Permanent Green, Terra Verde, Hooker's Green, and also Lemon Yellow. For the middle of the leaf, and also the first color that I put down, I use either a mix of Permanent Green and Lemon Yellow with the slightest bit of Hooker's Green, or Terra Verde and Lemon Yellow for a more subtle green. And for the darker gradient around the outside of the leaves, I just use a thick consistency of the Hooker's Green by itself and let the paint flow to create a soft transition. Now I'm just going to show you what I mean by that. So I use the mixture of the Permanent Green and Lemon Yellow. I think it has a slight of Terra Verde too, but it really doesn't matter. That just depends on how bright or subtle you want the green to be. And while the surface of this is still wet, I'm going to load my brush with the really dark Hooker's Green, and I'm using a very thick consistency of this. And while the surface is still wet from the paint, I'm just going to apply the Hooker's Green. And as you can see, the paint is slowly bleeding in, but it's not too neat. So you can always use your brush to neaten the sides to get a better gradation. And wherever you see there are parts that is lightening too much because the paint is seeping through to the lighter area of the leaf a bit more than you want it to, I just add more of the Hooker's Green, and because the surface is still wet, that surface can still take in more paint and it's still going to flow nicely. While I wait for this layer to dry, I'm going to move on to the back of the leaf first. For the back of the leaf, I'm going to be using the colors Crimson Lake, Ultramarine Deep, and Ivory Black. The back doesn't have the pattern, but because it's a flat color, you can also see the wavy texture of the leaf, and I'm going to add depth by using the Ultramarine Deep and the black. So to paint this part, I first put down the Crimson Lake as a flat wash, and while it's still the slightest bit wet, I mix in some Ultramarine Deep with the Crimson Lake. Then I start painting from the concave part of the curve down to the midrib of the leaf and continue this on either of the sides. Then after that layer has dried off, I added a little bit of ivory black into the previous mix and paint on a smaller section of the darker part to accentuate the wave. I will show you a bit more of this in detail as I'm painting it later on though. For the back of the leaf, I'm also going to be using white gouache, lemon yellow, and crimson lake for the midrib only at the back section of the leaf. To paint the pattern, I want to make sure that the first layer is completely dry because the slightest bit of dampness from the surface will make the paint bleed. To make sure that it's completely dry, I like to use a hair dryer sometimes if the surface of the paper is still slightly cold to the touch. And now that the first layer is completely dry, I'm going to paint the front pattern of the leaf. And for this, I'm only going to use the color Hooker's Green, and I'm going to use a very thick consistency of it. You may also switch to a smaller brush to make the control of the painting much easier, but I'm going to just stick with the same brush and I'm going to paint as I drew them before by altering the size. I've drawn the outline of the composition beforehand, so I'm just going to go straight in with painting. I first mixed the light green color mixture, and for this one I used a mixture of Terra Verde and lemon yellow, and I painted in a very wet but really thick consistency too. So even when it's thick, I still use a lot of water because I want the whole surface of the leaf to keep its moisture, since I want to add the dark green while the surface is still wet so it can spread across and create a smooth transition. If the surface isn't wet enough, you can also help it along with more water and by moving the paint around with your brush. For the next one, I'm going to add permanent green and lemon yellow for the light green color mixture. And as you can see, it's much brighter than the previous. So this is really up to your preference. I personally like using them in different ratios, so not all of the leaves look the same. And I'm just going to continue on painting the rest of the green part of the leaf, just like I did before. As I'm spreading the dark green to create a nice soft transition, there are some parts that turn out a little bit too light, so while the paint is still wet, I just added a very thick consistency of the dark green and add on to what was already on the paper to just increase the contrast. I'm going to do this for all of the green surfaces, and if you're painting a similar composition as I am, where both sides of the leaves are being exposed, make sure that you don't accidentally paint the same green for the back of the leaf. Once I'm done with all of the green areas, I'm going to wait for them to dry first before adding the pattern. So while I do that, I'm going to paint the back of the leaves. I forgot to mention, if you have leaves that are painted with parts of the side covered by the back of the leaf, make sure that you don't apply the dark green on that side because that part of the leaf would be covered and unseen. I'm also going to be painting the stems of the leaf for the parts where it's facing forward, and I'm just going to use Hooker's green for this. I'm leaving the leaves that is facing backwards because I want to use some of the red for the stem of those leaves. I'm going to start mixing the reds and the purple first before painting so they're ready on my palette. And I'm going to start by painting a flat wash with the Crimson Lake, but this time instead of going straight with the dark purple color, I'm going to paint a flat wash all across the backs of the leaves just so the paint has some time to settle and dry off a little bit. However, depending on how much water you used, yours might be dried or drier than mine. I want to work on a surface that is half drying, like it's not completely dry, but still has a bit of coldness to the touch or a slight sheen that is almost gone. And once it's at that stage, I added the mixture of Ultramarine Deep and Crimson Lake to add more of a burgundy dark purple color, and I paint diagonal lines from where the curves of the leaves are curved inwards down to the center of the rib of the leaf. And considering that my surface isn't too wet, I'm just going to go straight in with mixing some ivory black into the ultramarine deep and crimson lake mix and just paint on a thinner part of where I painted before just to get a better definition. I'm also going to do the same for this one, but considering this one has dried off a little bit too much, I used extra water to help spread the paint, and I'm still leaving a little bit of the base color to show some of the highlight. This leaves me with this little area, which will take a while to dry because I've only painted that and I have nothing else to work on. So I'm just going to use my hair dryer to speed up the drying process, and after it's dried off, I'm going to add the darker tones. At this stage, I also find that the second leaf is drying a little bit too light, so I added another layer of the ivory black, ultramarine deep, and crimson lake. Now that I'm done and the base color is now completely dry, I switched to a smaller brush and I loaded it with a thick consistency of the hooker screen, and I just start painting the pattern. As I was searching on Google for this plant, I realized that some of the pattern isn't as aligned as what I'm painting here, but considering the plant that I saw has this pattern, I'm just going to follow through with this, but you can also adjust it according to your reference. After I'm done with the pattern, I used the same hooker screen for the stem of the leaves, and I also added another layer of the purple mix to make the color suit the back of the leaf a little bit more. And last but not least, I mixed the color for the back rib of the leaf, which has white gouache, some crimson lake, and lemon yellow, and I used the same brush to paint the lines. So this is what I have at the moment, and after I painted it, the composition looks a little bit empty, so I ended up painting more leaves freehand. I'm just going to paint little ones to fill in some of the space. For this one, I just used the same exact method, and there's nothing different except for the fact that I painted this freehand. And that's pretty much it for this one. I don't usually take the time to paint leaves like this, but I might paint more tropical leaves in the future because they're actually quite interesting for me. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll see you at the next one. Bye!